The void trembled as the Kithar Dominion's flagship, the Vorkath, ripped into orbit above the devastated world of Jathun Prime. It wasn't just another ship. It was an instrument of fear, a cathedral of war built to crush hope itself. Its black armor gleamed like an obsidian blade under the light of the twin suns, absorbing the fury of the cosmos and reflecting only cold, merciless dominance. The heavens themselves seemed to recoil as the vessel descended, casting a shadow so vast it blanketed entire continents. Below, the broken surface of Jathun Prime responded with silent anguish. Mountain ranges, once proud and towering, sagged under the seismic tremors. Oceans boiled along their edges, belching towers of steam into the atmosphere. Cities, those that had dared to rise again after previous bombardments, crumbled to ash under the latest assault. The planet wasn't simply under attack. It was being unmade, erased from history by the iron will of the Kithar. This was no act of war. It was extinction, deliberate and absolute. In the labyrinthine guts of the ruined cities, far beneath the earth scorched by plasma storms, a hidden resistance still clung stubbornly to life. There, in the low flicker of dying lights and cracked hologram projectors, stood Commander Elias Vance. His uniform, once a proud symbol of Earth's defiance, was little more than tattered cloth now, scorched and smeared with the grime of 1,000 battles lost. But his eyes still burned with something the Kithar had failed to destroy: rage, cunning, and a terrifying refusal to surrender. The battered projector before him sputtered and whined, forcing ghostly images onto the cracked wall. Vance knelt, scrutinizing every frame of the Kithar High Marshal's latest address. Arthex Vaughn, wrapped in his ceremonial battle armor of liquid titanium and living alloys, loomed large in the projection, his voice a silk-wrapped dagger slicing through the minds of all who heard it. He spoke of mercy for the obedient and annihilation, for the defiant, another recycled threat, one that had cowed countless species into submission. But Vance wasn't listening to the words. He never cared for their sermons. His gaze was fixated on something more subtle, something no Kithar, no conqueror would ever willingly reveal. In the fluid movements of the High Marshal, in the fine tremors barely masked by the shimmering armor, Vance detected an anomaly. A twitch here, a hesitation there. It was minuscule, almost imperceptible, unless you were a man with nothing left to lose and everything to see. The stories he had once dismissed as mad ramblings, whispers of the unraveling among captured Kithar soldiers, rushed back into his mind. A biological flaw, a systemic weakness. No empire could rise without cracks forming under its own weight. No creation, however grand, was without fault. Even the gods of ancient myth fell, undone by arrogance or rot from within. Perhaps the Kithar were no different. A deep rumble shook the tunnel, sending loose stones and dust raining down upon the battered survivors around him. They were no army, merely the last stubborn embers of a fire meant to be snuffed out long ago. Children who had never seen an unbroken sky. Elder warriors who bore scars from battles their ancestors had lost. Scientists who no longer dreamed of discovery, but of revenge. And yet, when Vance spoke, every battered soul lifted their gaze to him, drawn by the iron certainty in his voice. "This is it," Vance said, each syllable heavy with conviction. "They are not gods. They are not immortal. They bleed. And we are the ones who will make them bleed." His voice was low but sharp enough to cut steel. Around him, hollow faces began to spark with a dangerous new energy. Hope, the real, bitter kind born of defiance, not naivety, began to smolder among them once more. Above, the Vorkath continued its preparations, unaware of the rebellion festering below. The great engines howled, drawing energy from the planet's own magnetic core. Plasma batteries thrummed with unbearable power, locking onto the surface. In mere minutes, Jathun Prime would be torn apart at the molecular level, its atmosphere set ablaze, its crust reduced to drifting slag. The Kithar would erase yet another world and inscribe their supremacy deeper into the galaxy's bones. But they had miscalculated. They had missed one final, desperate card hidden in humanity's broken hand. Before we jump into this epic tale, subscribe to HFY Chronicles for the most intense sci-fi battles, legendary warriors, and universe-shaking wars. Don't miss out. Hit that subscribe button and join the fight. Vance moved quickly now, every action precise. He crossed the broken communications array and knelt, pulling scorched panels apart with calloused hands. Beneath the ruined surface lay the old tech, the bones of a resistance built before most of the galaxy even knew the Kithar's name. The relay was ancient, degraded, almost forgotten, and yet still alive, still waiting. He whispered into the narrow, static-choked channel, choosing his words carefully. Code Black. Initiate Protocol Helix. Confirm genetic destabilization vectors. Target. Kithar High Command. Operation Wraithborn is go. Repeat. Operation Wraithborn is go. Silence answered him at first. Then, buried deep within the static, a soft click, a pulse of acknowledgement. And then, in the dark corners of the galaxy, human agents, some hidden within conquered worlds, some lying dormant within the very heart of Kithar society, began to move. Ancient codes activated, bio-agents long forgotten flickered back into terrible, lethal life. Humanity's last, most desperate weapon was not a fleet, nor a superweapon. It was a virus written into the DNA of a galactic empire, a reckoning seeded generations ago, waiting for the right spark to ignite it. Commander Vance straightened, wiping the blood from his cracked knuckles, his expression grim. He knew this was no simple victory. If Operation Wraithborn succeeded, it wouldn't just destroy the Kithar. It would expose a horrifying truth. The higher they climbed, the more fragile they became. In their obsession with power, the Kithar had engineered themselves into a corner from which there was no escape, and Vance, with nothing but iron will and ancestral fury, would be the architect of their fall. Above, the first plasma cannon fired. A sun-hot lance of energy split the heavens, carving a new scar into Jathun's surface. The countdown to extinction had begun, but so too had the countdown to the greatest collapse the galaxy would ever witness. Commander Elias Vance gave one last look to the broken world he stood upon, then vanished into the smoke, a ghost armed with humanity's deadliest secret, racing against annihilation to strike the fatal blow. The Kithar Empire had risen to its position through ruthless innovation and centuries of conquest, but its greatest weapon, its most terrifying asset, was its military infrastructure, a vast network of ships, colonies, and advanced bioengineered technology that allowed it to dominate entire sectors of space. The Kithar had learned to terraform worlds with devastating precision, creating perfect environments for their warriors to thrive and multiply. They had mastered energy weapons capable of vaporizing entire cities with a single shot, and their warships were almost invulnerable to conventional attacks, with shields powered by quantum stabilization fields and hulls laced with nanite regeneration systems. Yet, despite this awe-inspiring power, the Kithar Empire was crumbling from within. The cracks that Commander Vance had glimpsed during his brief encounter with the High Marshal's holographic image were not just random fluctuations. They were symptoms of a much deeper and more insidious problem. The Kithar had become too reliant on their technological superiority, too confident in their genetic enhancements, and too detached from the realities of the universe they had enslaved. They had overreached. They had ignored the laws of nature that governed every empire, from the smallest tribe to the greatest galactic sovereign. The disease that threatened to unravel them was not one that could be fought with weapons. It was a genetic flaw, a vulnerability built into the very essence of their civilization. The Kithar had always been masters of bioengineering, their genetic engineering programs allowing them to create soldiers of unmatched strength and resilience. But in their pursuit of perfection, they had made a grave error. The Kithar were not merely biological entities. They were a hybrid of organic and synthetic material, their bodies enhanced with nanite-infused genetic modifications that made them both formidable and fragile. The same nanites that gave them power also made them susceptible to a destabilizing virus, a virus that had been engineered in secret, buried deep within their genetic code, and hidden among the myriad of data streams and biological algorithms that governed their DNA. It was a weapon of last resort, a final option to cripple the Kithar should they ever face defeat. And now, after centuries of peace and dominance, the Kithar had no idea that the seed of their destruction had already been planted within their own ranks. It had been designed as a failsafe, something that could be activated only under extreme circumstances, and only by those who knew the secret. Commander Vance, a man who had witnessed the horrors of Kithar expansion firsthand, had discovered that secret. The virus, codenamed Wraithborn, was designed to target specific Kythar genetic markers, those that allowed their nanites to function at peak efficiency. It was a silent killer, one that would gradually destabilize their internal systems, causing them to lose control of their enhanced abilities. The Kythar would grow weaker with each passing day, their once invincible bodies succumbing to a slow, agonizing decay. And the more they relied on their bio-enhancements, the faster the virus would work, corrupting their DNA, overriding their internal programming, and rendering their entire military infrastructure useless. But even as the virus began to infiltrate the Kythar's biological systems, its effects were not immediately apparent. It wasn't like a traditional plague that could be detected by medical scanners or the naked eye. Instead, it worked on a molecular level, making tiny, almost imperceptible changes that would take time to manifest. The first signs were subtle: a slight weakness in a soldier's grip, an unsteady step, a moment of confusion that lasted only a fraction of a second. To the untrained eye, it would appear as if the Kythar were simply experiencing the effects of fatigue or stress. But for those who knew what to look for, the signs were unmistakable. Vance had learned of the virus years ago, when he was stationed on the human research vessel Arcturus. The Arcturus had been investigating strange anomalies within Kythar-controlled space, and it had stumbled upon a hidden data archive buried deep within an uncharted asteroid field. The data contained information on the Kythar's genetic engineering projects, including the Wraithborn virus. Vance had been one of the first to decrypt the files, and he had immediately recognized the potential of this virus as a weapon against their oppressors. It was a weapon that could bypass the Kythar's advanced technology, a weapon that could bring them to their knees without firing a single shot. And now, with humanity's last stand on the line, Vance had made the decision to activate it. But the virus was not a guaranteed success. The Kythar's nanite technology was incredibly advanced, and there was no way to know for sure how quickly the virus would spread or how effective it would be once it entered their systems. There was also the risk that the Kythar would detect the virus before it had a chance to take hold. The Kythar were not fools. They were an empire forged through endless wars, and they had learned to be paranoid, to expect betrayal from every corner of the galaxy. It was only a matter of time before they would realize that something was wrong. And when that happened, they would stop at nothing to find and eliminate the source of their weakness. On the ground beneath the Vorkath, Vance's forces were already preparing for their final assault. There was no time to wait for the virus to take full effect. They would have to strike while the Kythar were still vulnerable, before they could adapt and counterattack. The Resistance had spent months, even years, preparing for this moment. They had gathered intel, built hidden weapons caches, and trained in the ancient arts of guerrilla warfare. It was a desperate gamble, but it was the only chance they had left. Vance knew that the fate of Jathun Prime, and perhaps the entire galaxy, rested on the success of this mission. If the virus worked as intended, it would cripple the Kythar Empire from the inside, causing their armies to fall apart and their infrastructure to crumble. If it didn't, the Kythar would continue their war of annihilation, sweeping across the galaxy with unstoppable force, leaving nothing but ashes in their wake. The next few hours would determine everything. Vance gathered his most trusted officers around him, all of them wearing the same grim expression. There was no hope left to hold on to, no miracles to pray for. This was the final stand, the last chance to strike a blow against an empire that had taken everything from them. And, in that moment, as he looked into the eyes of his men and women, Vance knew one undeniable truth. They were fighting not just for survival, but for the very soul of the galaxy. The war had reached its climax. The galaxy would either see the end of the Kythar or the extinction of all those who dared resist. The first wave of the Resistance assault on Jathun Prime had begun under the cover of the planet's thick volcanic clouds. The surface of Jathun was a hostile landscape, its atmosphere a cocktail of sulfur, methane, and ash, making it nearly impossible for the unprepared to survive. But for the Resistance, it was the perfect battleground. The Kythars advanced, Sensors could be easily fooled by the planet's natural electromagnetic interference, and the terrain itself, barren, jagged mountains and endless fields of volcanic rock, would provide ample opportunities for stealth and surprise. Commander. Vance stood at the head of the Resistance's most elite unit, the Blackfire Battalion. These soldiers were the heart of humanity's last chance to turn the tide against the Kithar. A force forged through years of brutal training, unwavering loyalty, and relentless determination. They wore specialized exosuits, custom-designed for the harsh conditions of Jthun Prime, fitted with enhanced shielding and atmospheric filtration systems. They were equipped with energy rifles capable of cutting through Kithar armor, and their weapons were calibrated to take full advantage of the planetary conditions, using the magnetic fields to amplify their power. But even with all of this, the operation was still an extraordinary risk. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and operating in enemy territory. And yet, there was a fire in their eyes, an unshakable resolve. For many of these soldiers, this was the culmination of years of resistance, of watching their families and friends fall to the Kithar's unyielding campaigns of conquest. Now they had the opportunity to strike back, to tip the balance of power, and maybe, just maybe, change the course of galactic history. Vance surveyed the battlefield through his helmet's visor, watching as his troops moved into position. Their boots crunched over the rocky terrain, their every movement deliberate and calculated. He had instructed them to hold their positions for the moment, waiting for the virus to take effect. The Wraithborn virus, once activated, would be slow. There was no guarantee it would spread in time to have the desired effect. But every minute counted. The Kythar's armies were vast, and once they discovered the weakness in their systems, it would be only a matter of time before they adapted. Vance needed the virus to spread just enough before the Kithar could rally, to give his soldiers the opening they needed to break through their defenses. As the resistance moved deeper into Kithar territory, the first signs of the virus's effects began to show. One of the Kithar patrols, previously known for its sharp tactics and flawless coordination, suddenly faltered. Their movements became sluggish, their orders were miscommunicated. The Kithar soldiers, once the epitome of discipline, started to show hesitation, their weapons malfunctioning as the virus began to disrupt their internal nanite systems. Vance watched with a tense satisfaction as the first skirmishes began to unfold. The Kythar were still a formidable enemy, but their weakness was now undeniable. However, the first victory was short-lived. As the resistance pressed forward, they encountered a series of Kithar warships descending from the sky, their engines burning a fiery blue. These were no ordinary ships, they were the pinnacle of Kithar technology, designed to be nearly impervious to attack. Their hulls were reinforced with an alloy of superconducting metals, capable of withstanding most known weapons. The warships had been programmed to identify any unauthorized activity on the surface of Jthun Prime, and their sophisticated AI systems were designed to respond with extreme prejudice. The Resistance's first objective was to disable the warship's communications array. Without it, the Kithar wouldn't be able to call for reinforcements. Vance knew that if they couldn't disrupt their enemy's command structure, the entire mission would fail. As his soldiers advanced, they split into smaller squads, each tasked with a specific objective. The battalion moved with a deadly precision, knowing that failure wasn't an option. The first squad to reach the Kythar warship's defenses was led by Sergeant Emily Drexler, a former engineer who had become one of the most skilled explosives experts in the Resistance. She carried a compact but powerful plasma grenade launcher, designed to breach even the toughest shields. As she approached the warship, her heart raced, the anticipation of battle mingling with the gravity of their mission. They had only one shot at this. If they didn't disable the communications array, the Kythar would send out a signal that would bring their entire fleet crashing down on them. Drexler and her team moved under the cover of darkness, using the craggy terrain to mask their approach. They reached the warship's exterior, its hull shimmering with an otherworldly sheen, reflecting the volcanic eruptions of Jthun Prime. Drexler raised her hand, signaling for the team to halt. They were mere meters away from the ship now, and she could feel the pulse of energy emanating from the ship's core. With a deep breath, she activated the grenade launcher. The plasma shot through the air with a blinding flash, slamming into the ship's armor. For a brief moment, nothing happened. Then, with a deafening roar, The warship's outer shell erupted in a violent explosion, sending shockwaves through the ground. The communications array was disabled, and the ship's AI flickered momentarily as it struggled to process the damage. But as Drexler and her team celebrated their success, the full weight of the Kythar response hit. Hundreds of Kythar soldiers descended from their ships, their massive forms emerging from the smoke and debris. These were not just any soldiers. These were the Kythar elite, genetically enhanced to be stronger, faster, and more deadly than their peers. They were designed for one thing: extermination. The battle quickly became a brutal clash of strength and willpower. The resistance fought with everything they had, but the Kythar were relentless. Each soldier they took down seemed to be replaced by two more, their nanite-enhanced bodies regenerating, faster than ever. Vance, watching from a nearby ridge, knew that they were not just fighting for survival now, they were fighting for the galaxy itself. The Kythar were too powerful, too advanced. But the resistance had one thing they lacked: humanity's unyielding will to fight, to survive, no matter the cost. And then, just as the battle seemed to tip in the Kythar's favor, the virus began to spread faster. The Kythar soldiers started to falter more frequently, their enhanced abilities becoming erratic. Some of them collapsed mid-battle, their internal systems failing. The virus was having the desired effect, slowly but surely unraveling the very fabric of the Kythar's biological superiority. With their momentum slowed, the resistance pushed forward, launching a final assault. Vance's voice crackled over the comms, rallying his troops for one final charge. "Now!" he shouted. "We end this here, once and for all." The final assault was nothing short of chaos. The air crackled with the sound of energy blasts and the roar of exploding ammunition. Resistance forces clashed with the Kythar elite in a battle that would determine the fate of not only Jathoon Prime, but the entire galaxy. Vance stood at the forefront, his exosuit's enhanced strength and speed pushing him forward like a force of nature. Every move he made was decisive. His rifle discharged in perfect rhythm, cutting down Kythar soldiers with surgical precision. But even as their numbers dwindled, the alien warriors fought with an unrelenting ferocity, their battle-hardened instincts and advanced cybernetic enhancements making them deadly adversaries. Drexler's squad, having successfully breached the communications array, was now racing against the clock to plant the final set of explosives on the warship's power core. The moment the charges detonated, the Kythar fleet would be crippled, unable to coordinate any further resistance. Yet, as they made their way through the labyrinthine corridors of the warship's interior, the air grew thick with tension. The Kythar were not just soldiers, they were a collective intelligence, each mind connected by an intricate neural network that allowed them to share information in real time. Their hive-like mentality had made them formidable, but it had also made them vulnerable. As they navigated the ship's corridors, Drexler's mind raced. She knew this would be the moment, the one chance for the resistance to strike a decisive blow. Her fingers trembled as she placed the final explosive charge on the warship's reactor core. She could hear the Kythar soldiers closing in, their footsteps echoing down the hallway like the thunder of an incoming storm. They were relentless, but the virus had taken hold. The neural network that once connected them was now unraveling, fraying at the edges. Their movements were erratic, their actions delayed as their internal systems began to malfunction. It was a gift and a curse. The Kythar's technological superiority was now their greatest weakness. Drexler's heart pounded as she activated the detonator. A series of beeps echoed in her ear as the countdown began. She and her squad took up positions, ready for the inevitable explosion. But as the seconds ticked down, Drexler's instincts told her something was wrong. The ship's core had not yet gone critical. The countdown was still active, but the expected tremors, the warning signs of a failing system, had not yet manifested. Her eyes widened as she realized what had happened. The Kythar's advanced AI had detected the virus and adapted. They had isolated the infected portion of their neural network, quarantining it from the rest of their collective intelligence. They had anticipated the virus, and they had learned to fight back. The Kythar weren't as vulnerable as they seemed. They were evolving. "Abort the mission!" Drexler screamed into her comms, but it was too late. The explosive charge detonated with a deafening roar, but instead of collapsing the ship's power core, it triggered a defensive mechanism. The warship's core began to destabilize, but not in the way they had expected. A new threat emerged. The Kithar were adapting, creating their own defense systems against the Resistance's weapons. The virus had been a temporary advantage, but now it was a race against time. Back on the surface, Vance watched the sky darken as the Kithar warships began to shift. From the ground, it looked as if the alien fleet was reorganizing. But Vance knew better. The Kithar were now preparing for a full-scale counterattack. Their elite forces were already regrouping, and a new wave of reinforcements was arriving through the atmosphere. If the Resistance didn't act quickly, all their progress would be undone. "We need to hold them off," Vance's voice echoed over the comms. "Keep pushing, keep moving forward, don't let them gain ground." The Resistance rallied, moving in unison to retake the advantage. But as they pressed forward, they found themselves up against an entirely new kind of threat. The Kithar had developed a new form of warfare, biomechanical soldiers, hybrids of living tissue and mechanical armor, designed to withstand the virus and adapt to its effects. These new warriors were faster, stronger, and more durable than their predecessors. They were the next step in Kithar evolution, a chilling glimpse of the future. As the Resistance clashed with these biomechanical monstrosities, Vance's mind raced. The Kithar were relentless, but there was something that could still be exploited, a hidden weakness. The Kithar's adaptation was not flawless. Their biological enhancements still required maintenance, and their machines needed to be recharged and recalibrated. There was a narrow window of opportunity, a chance to exploit the Kithar's growing overconfidence. Vance and his squad engaged the biomechanical soldiers in close quarters, using their specialized suits to gain the upper hand. With each strike, Vance's mind worked furiously, calculating their next move. He knew they couldn't win through brute force alone. They needed to outthink the Kithar, to push their enemy into a corner where their adaptations would become their downfall. Then, it happened. A sudden surge of energy flooded the battlefield as the Resistance's AI-controlled warship, the Phoenix, arrived in orbit above Jathuan Prime. The ship's advanced weaponry tore into the Kithar forces, laying waste to everything in its path. The warship's main cannon fired a burst of energy that sent shockwaves rippling across the surface of the planet, creating a temporary but critical breach in the Kithar defenses. With the Kithar momentarily stunned, Vance made his move. He led his squad through the smoke and debris, pushing forward to where the Kithar's neural network control center was located. It was their last chance to deliver a fatal blow to the alien empire. If they could destroy the control center, they could sever the Kithar's collective consciousness, leaving them vulnerable and disoriented. The fight to reach the control center was intense. Resistance soldiers fought with every ounce of their strength, using the terrain to their advantage. But every time they made progress, the Kithar adapted, responding with greater efficiency, countering their every move. The stakes had never been higher, and the Resistance was running out of time. Finally, they reached the heart of the Kithar's operations, an immense chamber filled with pulsing energy and glowing consoles, the neural nexus where the Kithar's collective mind resided. This was the heart of the Kithar Empire, the source of their power. Vance's team pushed forward, fighting through wave after wave of biomechanical soldiers, each one more terrifying than the last. But they knew that this was their final chance, to end the Kithar threat once and for all. Vance was the first to breach the control center, his rifle raised. "We end this now," he muttered under his breath. The control center was a labyrinth of sleek metallic walls and intricate neural interfaces, glowing with strange alien symbols that pulsed like the heartbeats of an ancient organism. It was here, in the heart of the Kithar Empire, that everything had led. Vance stood at the threshold, his breath shallow but steady. The air was thick with tension. This was it. This was the moment where the fate of countless worlds would be decided. His squad moved cautiously, their footsteps reverberating on the cold, polished floor. Around them, the whir of machinery filled the air, each hum and beep a reminder that they were inside the very nerve center of a vast and technologically advanced empire. The Kithar's neural network, an interconnected web of minds, was housed here. Every decision, every order, every action of the Kithar was processed and broadcasted from this very location, and if they could destroy it, they could bring down the entire empire. But the Kithar were not just going to let that happen without a fight. From the shadows, the first of the biomechanical soldiers emerged. These creatures were a nightmarish fusion of organic and synthetic, their eyes glowing with cold, calculated intelligence. They were faster and more durable than anything Vance and his team had faced before. As the first soldier lunged at them, its enhanced limbs moving with terrifying speed, Vance barely had time to react. He raised his rifle, firing in a seamless motion. But the shot only grazed the soldier's shoulder as it sidestepped with unnerving agility. The soldier retaliated, swinging a massive mechanical arm that sent one of Vance's squadmates sprawling across the floor. Blood splattered the smooth surface, a stark contrast to the sterile white of the chamber. But the team was ready. The time battle was intense, with each soldier using every tool at their disposal, energy blades, plasma pistols, and explosive charges, to hold the line. But the Kithar's adaptive nature meant that each time they hit one of the biomechanical soldiers, the creatures adapted, evolving before their very eyes. "This is getting out of hand," one of the squad members shouted, his voice tight with strain as he fired again, his shots dissipating into the air with no effect. "We need to reach the Nexus now, before they overwhelm us." Vance didn't need to hear it twice. He knew the clock was ticking. Every moment they spent fighting, these enhanced soldiers, was a moment the Kithar were using to rebuild their forces. They needed to destroy the control center, now. "Drexler, take the lead," Vance ordered. "The rest of us will cover you." Without hesitation, Drexler moved forward, her combat suit's AI interface guiding her through the maze of glowing consoles and neural terminals. The rest of the squad followed, taking down Kithar soldiers as they moved through the center. Vance's mind raced as he observed their surroundings. The architecture here was unlike anything he had ever seen. Alien, alienating, and perfectly designed for the Kithar's purposes. But it wasn't invulnerable. He could see the weak points in the walls, the exposed cables, the power conduits that connected everything. It was all too familiar. The Kithar may have been adaptive, but they still had their vulnerabilities. The squad continued forward, reaching the central nexus where the Kithar's vast neural network converged. It was a massive pulsing orb at the center of the room, suspended in midair by a web of energy conduits that stretched from every corner of the chamber. It was beautiful in its own right, a masterpiece of alien engineering, but it was also a weapon of unimaginable power, a weapon that needed to be destroyed. Drexler crouched by the base of the orb, her hands flying over the interface as she bypassed security systems and began planting explosive charges. Every second that ticked by felt like an eternity. The Kithar were relentless. More soldiers were pouring into the room, their eyes cold, their movements synchronized with terrifying precision. They knew what was at stake. They knew the resistance was close to victory, and they would not let that happen without a final, desperate push. The first explosion went off with a deafening boom, but the orb remained undamaged. Drexler cursed under her breath. She had expected that. The Kithar had designed their control center to withstand conventional weapons. But she had something more powerful in mind. Reaching into her pack, she pulled out a device, an EMP bomb, designed to disrupt the neural network entirely. This was the final step. If she could activate it and link it to the orb's energy flow, the entire Kithar collective consciousness would be severed. The Empire would collapse. Drexler's fingers shook as she connected the EMP to the orb's power conduit. The countdown began, a low hum reverberating through the room. She could feel the weight of the moment, the enormity of the choice they were about to make. The Kithar would be shattered, cut off from their collective mind, left in disarray. It was a chance for the galaxy to rise, to reclaim the peace that the Kithar had stolen. But just as the final seconds ticked down, a Kithar warlord, massive and terrifying, burst into the room. Its eyes burned with hatred as it charged, its biotic enhancements giving it strength beyond anything Vance had seen. It swung a massive energy blade at Drexler, narrowly missing as she dove to the side, rolling behind one of the control consoles for cover. Vance's heart raced as the warlord approached Drexler, its blade crackling with destructive energy. He couldn't let it reach her. Without thinking, he leapt forward, firing his plasma rifle at the warlord. The shot struck the beast's armor, but it was too thick, too strong. The warlord bellowed in fury, swinging its blade toward Vance, but he was already moving, dodging, To the side as Drexler's voice rang out over the comms. "It's done," she shouted. A moment later, the EMP detonated with a sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the Kythar warship. The neural network flickered, then shorted out entirely. The Kythar soldiers froze mid-motion, their eyes blank, their bodies slumping to the ground. The warlord let out a final roar of defiance as its systems went offline, its once terrifying strength reduced to nothing. The Kythar Empire had fallen. Vance stood, breathless, watching the destruction unfold. The control center was no longer a symbol of Kythar power. It was a tomb. The neural network had been severed, the hive mind broken. It was over. But as the silence of victory descended upon them, Vance couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The Kythar were gone, but the galaxy had changed forever. Who would rise to fill the void they left behind? And could the Resistance, now victorious, prevent themselves from becoming what they had fought against? The answers were uncertain. But one thing was clear. Humanity had proved it was no longer a passive player in the galaxy. It had risen from the ashes of the Kythar's destruction, stronger, more determined. And with this victory, a new chapter had begun.